Rome, the beating heart of an empire that stretched across continents, a city of marble and blood. In the year 37 AD, after 2 decades under the shadow of the suspicious and aging Emperor Tiberius, the people of Rome yearned for hope. They longed for a new leader, young, vibrant, and merciful. They found him in a boy they had once adored, a boy who had grown into a man destined for power. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. History remembers him by another name, Caligula. This is the story of Caligula, a prince celebrated as the savior of Rome, who became one of its darkest tyrants, a ruler whose brief 4 years on the throne revealed how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, and how one man's madness could plunge an empire into terror. Caligula was born in 12 AD into one of the most powerful bloodlines in Roman history. His father Germanicus was the golden prince of the empire. Handsome, charismatic, victorious in battle, he was everything Rome admired. Soldiers worshipped him, and the people believed he would one day be emperor. To them, Germanicus was Rome's future, but Roman politics was cruel. Germanicus died suddenly in 19 AD under suspicious circumstances. Many believed he was poisoned on the orders of Emperor Tiberius, who feared Germanicus's popularity. For the young Caligula, his father's death was more than tragedy. It was a lesson. In Rome, glory and betrayal walked hand in hand. After Germanicus's death, the family became targets. Caligula's mother, Agrippina the Elder, and his brothers were accused of treason and exiled. Some were starved to death. Caligula survived only because he was still a child, and because Tiberius, ever suspicious, thought it better to keep the boy under watch. By the time he was a teenager, Caligula had witnessed the destruction of nearly everyone he loved. He learned to mask his feelings, to survive in silence. In the snake pit of Roman politics, showing fear meant death. At age 18, Caligula was summoned to live with the aging emperor, Tiberius, on the island of Capri. To the outside world, this was an honor. In truth, it was a gilded cage. Capri was a place of fear, where Tiberius ruled with suspicion, paranoia, and cruelty. The old emperor executed nobles at the whisper of treason. He indulged in grotesque excesses, and all the while, young Caligula watched. Historians wrote that Caligula learned to hide his hatred, to smile while others bled. He became the perfect actor, wearing a mask of obedience. Tiberius once remarked, "Caligula is a serpent, and I am rearing a viper for the Roman people." In March of 37 AD, Tiberius died, some say from illness. Others whisper he was smothered with a pillow by his own guard. He was 77 years old. After years of suspicion and cruelty, Rome celebrated his death. The people looked to the young Caligula, now 24, as the shining hope of a new era.
The Senate hailed him as emperor. He was the grandson of Mark Antony, the great-nephew of Augustus and the son of Germanicus. To the Roman people, Caligula was destiny fulfilled. At last, they believed, Rome had found its savior. When Caligula first took the throne, Rome rejoiced. He was young, handsome, and charming, the son of Germanicus, the hero the people had never forgotten. In his first months, Caligula acted as the emperor they had dreamed of. He released prisoners unjustly held by Tiberius. He restored exiles to their homes. He abolished unpopular taxes and gave generous donatives to the army. For the common people, he hosted lavish games, spectacles, and gladiatorial contests. Rome had suffered under the suspicion and cruelty of Tiberius. Now at last they had an emperor who seemed merciful. The Senate praised him. The people adored him. Even the Praetorian Guard, Rome's most dangerous kingmakers, pledged loyalty. For a moment, Caligula was the Golden Prince reborn. Rome believed it had entered a new age of prosperity. But within months of his reign, the young emperor was struck by a mysterious illness. Ancient writers describe it as a violent fever. Some whisper it was poisoning. Others believe it may have been epilepsy or a neurological condition. Whatever its cause, the emperor hovered between life and death. Rome held its breath. The streets filled with prayers and sacrifices. Crowds begged the gods to spare him, for they loved him too deeply to lose him so soon. After weeks of suffering, Caligula recovered. The people rejoiced, but something had changed. The emperor who emerged from his sickbed was not the same man. Whether from pain, brain injury, or the realization of his own mortality, Caligula's mind had shifted. What began as generosity turned into extravagance. What began as charm darkened into cruelty. Rome's golden prince began his descent into madness. The months after his recovery, Caligula's actions grew unpredictable. He executed those he believed had prayed for his death instead of his recovery. He demanded new honors for himself and statues, festivals, and divine titles. His appetite for spending became insatiable. He poured Rome's wealth into games and spectacles so vast that the treasury began to collapse. Where Tiberius had been cautious and restrained, Caligula seemed determined to display his power in the grandest, most reckless ways. The Senate, once hopeful, grew uneasy. The praetorians, once loyal, began to whisper. And the people, though still entertained by lavish games, began to see shadows in the emperor's smile. Caligula's illness had marked the turning point. From this moment, the man who had been adored as Rome's savior would begin to terrify his own empire. By the year 38, Caligula's ambitions had grown beyond mortal limits. He declared himself not only emperor but a living god. Temples were rededicated in his honor. Statues of deities were refashioned with his own likeness. Priests were ordered to serve his cult, and sacrifices were made in his name. In Rome, this was more than arrogance. It was blasphemy. For centuries, emperors had been deified after death. Caligula demanded worship while he still lived. He dressed as Apollo, as Mercury, even as Venus, parading himself as all the gods in one body. The message was clear. There was no power in Rome, on earth or in heaven, greater than his own. For the Senate, Caligula's behavior was more than unsettling. It was humiliating. He forced senators to grovel before him, to run alongside his chariot like slaves, to remain silent while he mocked them in public. Those who resisted risked exile or death. He stripped nobles of their dignity, not out of necessity, but out of contempt. One story tells that Caligula, in scorn for the Senate, elevated his favorite horse, Incitatus. The animal was given a marble stable, jeweled harnesses, and a household of servants. Some sources claim he even promised to make the horse consul, the highest office in the state. Whether truth or satire, the message was unmistakable. Rome's most ancient institutions meant nothing to him. He alone was power. As the months passed, cruelty became Caligula's language. Executions multiplied. A word, a glance, a rumor could condemn a man. Nobles and senators lived in constant terror. Some were forced to watch their loved ones tortured, others to commit suicide at the emperor's command. Caligula relished the suffering he inflicted. He once boasted that he wished Rome had a single neck, so that he might strike it with one blow, yet his cruelty was not reserved for the elite. Ordinary citizens were dragged into the arena and killed for amusement. Families were ruined by sudden taxes. The city that once celebrated him now whispered in fear. In 40 AD, Caligula turned his attention to the frontiers. But instead of waging war as his father Germanicus once had, he turned military campaigns into theater. At the shores of the English Channel, he reportedly ordered his soldiers to collect seashells, declaring them spoils of victory from Neptune, god of the sea. In another moment, he announced triumph over enemies who had never been fought. Rome's proud legions, once the terror of the world, had been reduced to props in his spectacle of madness. His extravagance drained Rome's treasury. The lavish games, architectural projects, and personal luxuries devoured the empire's wealth. To refill the coffers, he imposed brutal taxes, seized estates, and even auctioned off the lives of gladiators to the highest bidder. Rome's economy strained under his greed. The empire that had once celebrated his generosity now bled under his excesses. The end of his third year, Rome lived in fear. Senators dreaded his whims. Generals mocked him in whispers. Common people cursed the day they had cheered his name Caligula. Once the Golden Prince now ruled as a god, a tyrant and a monster. His reign of terror had consumed the hope that once lifted him to power. But even in the shadow of his cruelty, plots began to form. For if one man's madness had brought terror to Rome, only one act of violence could bring it to an end. By the beginning of 41 AD, Caligula's reign had become unbearable. The Senate seethed with humiliation, the treasury bled dry, and the Praetorian Guard, once his protectors, now feared for their lives. Every day, the emperor's whims grew more dangerous. He mocked generals, dishonored nobles, and turned allies into enemies. Rome was no longer ruled. It was terrorized. Whispers spread through the palace halls. Men who once bowed in silence began to plot in secret. At the heart of this growing conspiracy stood Cassius Chaerea, a Praetorian officer insulted too many times by Caligula's cruelty. He had been mocked for weakness, ridiculed with obscene gestures. The humiliation festered into vengeance, and soon vengeance would find its moment. On January 24th, 41 AD, Caligula prepared for a series of games in the palace theater. The air in Rome was heavy with expectation. Guards shifted uneasily. Senators avoided his gaze. The emperor, oblivious, reveled in his power, laughing, sneering, demanding obedience from those who secretly prayed for his death. As Caligula left the theater and made his way through a secluded corridor, the plot was sprung. Chaerea and his fellow conspirators struck swiftly. Daggers flashed. The emperor, who called himself a god, fell to the ground, bleeding and screaming, cut down by the very guards sworn to protect him. His reign, 4 years of madness and terror, ended not in triumph, but in betrayal and violence. The assassination did not end with Caligula. His wife Caesonia and his young daughter were murdered to erase his bloodline. The palace shook with panic as senators scrambled to restore order, fearing civil war, fearing vengeance, fearing the chaos they themselves had unleashed. But amid the blood and fear, one man was found hiding, trembling behind a curtain. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, overlooked for his stammer and limp, was hailed as emperor by the Praetorian Guard. In a single day, Rome had traded one unlikely ruler for another. The empire survived, but the scars of Caligula's rule would not be forgotten. History would remember Caligula not as the beloved son of Germanicus, not as the hopeful prince who once brought joy to Rome, but as the mad emperor who demanded worship, who mocked his people, who ruled with cruelty and delusion. To some, he was a warning of what happens when absolute power is given to a broken soul. To others, he was a tragic figure, a young man shaped by trauma, consumed by illness and undone by the very empire that raised him. In the end, Caligula's story is not just about madness. It is about Rome itself, about the dangers of unchecked power, the fragility of institutions, and the human cost of empire. His fall was not only the fall of a prince, but a reminder that even the greatest of civilizations could be ruled by the darkest of men. This was Caligula, the emperor, who wanted to be a god, and instead became a monster. His reign lasted only 4 years, but his name has echoed through centuries, a cautionary tale of power, madness, and the price of empire.